Tonight, upheaval overseas. Israel's heartache as Hamas terrorists parade the coffins of the innocent Bebas children through the streets of Gaza before returning them to Israel. The international outrage and
a dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he's not going to have a country left.
high-stakes spat, the growing rift between President Trump and Ukraine's President Zelenskyy. What it means for the ongoing war and peace talks with Russia. Plus,
spend the American people's tax money on the American people's priority.
MAGA more popular than ever, but a fresh slate of polls shows President Trump's popularity could be declining. We look back on the administration's first month in office. Coming up on Faith Nation Friday. Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us this Friday. I'm Jenna Browder. On Fridays, we like to take a look back at the week and break down the biggest stories. This week marked 1 month of President Trump's second administration, and as usual, there was no shortage of news. Let me introduce you to our panel this week. We have CBN News Chief Political Analyst David Brody, live from CPAC, Senior White House Correspondent Kelly Wright, and Raj Nair, Senior Digital Media Host for CBN. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Happy Friday. Let's start tonight with Israel, where the fate of the Bebas family, Sheree Bebas and her 2 young sons, has reignited deep pain, deep anger, reminding many of the horrors of October 7th. Hamas claimed to have returned their bodies, but Israeli officials say the remains of Sheree Bebas, along with was someone else, adding yet more salt to the wound, another layer of devastation to this tragedy. Kelly, let's start with you. What has the response been from the White House?
Well, the response has been from Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, as well as the President and all of the members who are following this very closely, one of outrage. They're shocked that Hamas would do this. At the same time, it is something that they've grown accustomed to, how heinous and how treacherous Hamas is. Bear in mind that Hamas is deemed a terrorist organization, and the White House stating that. And as a result of that, they will be treated as such. And of course, the White House is still stipulating that Hamas can not be in power in order to move forward with additional ceasefire, as well as to restore Gaza and the plight of the Palestinian people. But I would tell you real quick, Jenna, I got some news from the Deputy Foreign Minister in Israel, and she said this is just despicable and beyond the pale of what Hamas knowingly, according to her, knowingly did. And as a result of that, she is expressing the members of the Knesset being outraged by this, and of course, Bibi Netanyahu doing the same thing.
David, this latest tragedy puts the Gaza ceasefire in real question. Israel and Hamas have not agreed to phase 2 yet, despite the Trump administration pushing for a diplomatic solution there. Where do things go from here?
Well, it's dicey at best, Jenna. There's not even a question about that. Look, there's going to be a real problem going forward, and Israel's going to have some decisions to make. I mean, this is insult to injury, and the injury was bad enough to begin with on October 7th. And so, you know, you look at as to what happens here. No one's quite sure, but I will tell you this, that there's obvious concern that Israel is getting not only 4 dead hostages back, one of them, as we know now, not necessarily the woman that we thought it was going to be, but beyond that, hundreds of Palestinian prisoners are going to be released. So dead hostages for living Palestinians. Look, this has been a mess for Israel, and it's really going to be, I think, politically, residually a problem for Netanyahu going forward. We'll see how that plays out as well.
Yeah. Raj, we know Jews here in the United States are feeling a lot less safe. This week in Brooklyn, demonstrators targeted an Orthodox neighborhood, agitators chanting "Zionists go to hell" and waving Palestinian flags. How concerned should we be about growing anti-Semitism in the U.S., and how should our leaders respond?
Extremely. You know, I've lived in Brooklyn for many years, and if you know where Borough Park is, where this happens, you know that they went there intentionally. No one just stumbles into Borough Park. And they went there to pick a fight. And I think what's, you know, you're seeing them say things like Zionist this and, you know, go home settler intifada. This is a call for genocide in a place with a bunch of Orthodox Jewish people. This is not about anti-Zionism. This is not about Israel. This is anti-Semitism, unmasked, unscared. This is, and the thing is people are like, oh, this is just racism against Jewish people. I don't think that's the whole story. I don't think this is just racism. In my personal opinion, this is a spiritual, demonic force of anti-Semitism rearing its ugly head. And for some reason, all of a sudden it's become kosher, from Australia to Columbia University, to just be, you mask it. Oh, I'm anti-Zionist, I'm not anti-Israel, I'm not anti-Jewish. It's all the same thing. And I think this is just a demonic force being allowed to parade. And I think if we don't do something about it, it's going to keep spreading.
Raj, how do you think our leaders should respond?
That's the tough one, because I don't know how you legislate this out of existence, but I think it has to come down with emotional support. I don't know how you can legislate anti-Semitism away, but the actions that are happening in, like I said, like in Australia, like in the UK, where you're allowed to just say all these things, I think you have to have a very clear, unequivocal leadership. But then when it comes to actually doing something legislatively, that's tough. I think you just need to have because at the end of the day, people feel confident to do this thing because it's become politically okay. And we have, not just politically, socially okay. And we have to make sure that everyone who has a microphone, everyone who has a voice, is clear and loud that this is absolutely unacceptable.
Raj and Jenna, if I could get something in real quickly. This is one of the reasons why President Trump launched a task force to deal with anti-Christian and anti-Semitic behavior in this country. So the president is actually stepping up to do something to try not only to legislate it, but to get people to stop doing these kinds of provocative actions. And then I would say real quickly, Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, issued the following statement in response to what we saw take place in Borough Park. He said, the vile and anti-Semitic rhetoric directed at Jewish residents in Borough Park is unacceptable and unconscionable. We will not tolerate the egregious behavior on display that was clearly designed to intimidate and harass Jews in the Borough Park neighborhood. People of goodwill across New York City and throughout the nation must continue to do everything possible to stop this kind of anti-Semitic behavior. Important to add those notes.
All right, thank you, Kelly. And thank you, gentlemen. We are going to take a quick break, but the panel stays with us. When we come back, the fight for free speech in Europe and what's behind the war of words between President Trump and Ukraine's President Zelenskyy. Also, what it means for the United States. Keep it here.
Just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. This is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target. And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger.
Vice President Vance, not mincing words, speaking at the Munich Security Conference in Germany this week. He made headlines calling out European leaders, saying free speech is under attack there. Let's discuss what this means here in the United States. David, let's start with you. What did you make of the Vice President's speech, and was this a warning sign or a warning for what could happen here in the United States?
Well, let's be clear, Jenna. This should surprise no one. I know European leaders were aghast at J.D. Vance saying this, but why exactly? I mean, this is the Trump rhetoric. It's the Trump doctrine. It is populist in nature, and it makes every sense in the world. And we're not just talking about on free speech. We're talking about calling out Europe on, especially NATO members, obviously on NATO funding, talking to them and imposing tariffs. So you just go down the line, basically, to put it in kind of a very simple way, the gravy train is over. at least from a financial standpoint when it comes to tariffs. But beyond that, just if you look at free speech and NATO, you just put the whole thing together. And Donald Trump is trying to not be a bully on the world stage. He just wants to level the playing field. And Europe has had it pretty cozy for many, many decades, if you will. And Donald Trump is saying no more to that.
So we saw a war of words this week over the actual war in Ukraine. President Trump calling Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy a dictator. Then Zelenskyy accused Trump of spreading Russian propaganda. And now it looks like Europe is actually stepping up to help Ukraine. Kelly, do you think this is all chess moves, or is this getting personal for Trump?
Well, right now it appears that some of it might be personal. The president speaking to a former colleague of mine on Fox News, Brian Kilmeade, and Brian Kilmeade pushing back on the president, stating that, Mr. President, Russia started this war, and the president doubling down on how he believes that Zelenskyy has blown it, and all of the beautiful buildings, he says, have been destroyed as a result of Zelensky's actions or inaction, according to the president. The other thing that has to be said is that the president, as well as his Mike Waltz, are trying to figure out how to keep Ukraine and Russia at the table. But to Zelensky's point, he believes that it's a war of words now between he and the President of the United States. And former General Jack Kane says that is very unfortunate to see these two men going against each other. It's almost like Putin is standing beside and watching it with glee.
Yeah. Raj, do you want to weigh in on? Yeah, David, go ahead.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
I think what's important here is to understand the perspective, not necessarily of Trump, but the way he sees the world, right? The art of the deal. So when he says that Zelenskyy started it, obviously poor choice of words as it relates to started it, because everybody thinks means it is the war, and it is. But the way Trump sees it is that there were negotiations between Zelenskyy and Putin, between Russia and Ukraine, at least 6 times within the first 2 to 3 weeks of the war back in 2022. And the way Trump sees it is that Zelenskyy had a deal on the table and he should have taken the deal, and that's why he's saying this war should have never started in the first place. And you walked away from a deal, and that was a bad deal for you. You shouldn't have done that, and you should have negotiated better. See, that's the way Trump sees things, and that's why he says the things he says. I think it's important to understand the mentality of Donald Trump as to why he would even say something like that.
Yeah, Secretary of State Rubio also gave an interview, I think it was yesterday,
Yes.
talking about how this administration doesn't appreciate the comments coming from Zelenskyy. They feel like they've given him a lot, and then he goes in and kind of complains and talks about what they're not giving him and not, thanking them for what they are giving him. Anyway, it is a true war of words. All right, gentlemen, thank you. Still to come, Trump's attack on the federal bureaucracy, Elon Musk's power, and the political calculations of it all. We discuss that after the break. Welcome back. Well, it may be hard to believe, but we are just 1 month into the new Trump administration. No doubt a defining feature of Trump 2.0 is all of the work of DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency, and what they're doing. As Axios put it this week, they are slashing and burning their way through government agencies. Some love it, some hate it. David, a new Reuters Ipsos poll found a majority of people are concerned about impacts to services like Social Security. Is this politically risky for President Trump and Republicans?
I don't think so. The mandate is there. We know that from the polls. And Donald Trump, President Trump, has said time and time again that Social Security cuts are off the table, Medicaid cuts are off the table. Now, having said that, there are going to be some media headlines written about maybe tinkering at the edges, but I don't think that politically will put him necessarily in any jeopardy. He's having the time of his life right now. He's laughing more than I've ever seen him laugh, definitely as president, but maybe even more in the last 15 years or so that I've known him. Look, the way I see this, Jenna, and I've talked to some sources, high-ranking sources at, well, I won't give the agencies. I probably shouldn't give the agencies if I'm going to talk this way, but I'll just say this, that the way this is going is that you got Elon Musk's tech squad, the geek squad, right? You know, the Best Buy geek squad. Okay, they're going through all of it. And then Musk gets word of all of this. And then my sources are telling me the way this is working is that sometimes he's going to the cabinet heads, But a lot of times he's just going to Russ Vought over at OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. Then eventually goes to Susie Wiles, the president himself, and Stephen Miller inside the White House. So it's a bit of a hodgepodge as to what kind of cuts they're deciding on. And that's as much as I could understand about streamlining of this process. And of course, we haven't even talked about the congressional aspect to all of this.
Yeah, so there are dozens of lawsuits around some of the action that DOJ is doing in the executive order. Some on the left have gone so far to say we're in a constitutional crisis. Kelly, do you think Trump is testing the limit on executive power? And a lot of folks are saying they don't like that he's maybe has access to some sensitive information or personal details.
Or you're speaking about Elon Musk having
Elon
access
Musk,
to those that personal information, for example, at Treasury and things of that nature. The president is pushing the envelope on executive orders because he wants to get the job done. Also, bear in mind that he's trying to set things up in such a way that he will deal specifically with that $36 trillion debt that we have. And heretofore, no president has been bold enough or courageous enough to do that. Barack Obama talked about doing something about it and never got it done. This president is doing so. His critics are saying, but you're doing it with a sledgehammer as opposed with a scalpel. And as I've stated all along, this president has to govern. He has to work with a bipartisan approach. He knows that the left is against him and talking about constitutional crisis. And the president is stating, we all have to get to a point where we come together in the halls of Congress, because Congress ultimately will have to pass a budget to do everything the president is talking about doing through his executive orders.
Yeah, Raj, do you want to weigh in just a few seconds that we have left?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is there needs to be wholesale things that are being done. We did a whole story about how $3 million were given to a Palestinian rapper. And I think you're seeing stories like this trickle in where people are saying, listen, it'd be nice to renovate, but we needed to start from square one and build things back up. So I think, as was mentioned, this is a mandate. This is why one of the reasons he was elected. So when Elon Musk goes out of his way to say, hey guys, I am the representative of a democracy to combat a bureaucracy. So I think he's trying to say everything that was voted for is exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, I heard one analysis this week that was talking about a lot of these programs and different things might have merit, but not they don't necessarily all need to be funded by taxpayers. He also said it was kind of a stress test, that things will get taken away and things that they deem, truly essential could get added back. All right, up next, thousands of excited conservatives descend on Washington, D.C. for the CPAC convention. We'll talk about where the conservative movement stands in the era of Trump.
I do think that we've had maybe more executive orders than CNN has viewers each night. So hello to our friends at CNN.
The conservative convention CPAC is happening right now in Washington, and the MAGA faithful have a lot to celebrate with Trump in office and lots of action on their priorities. David, you've been attending CPAC. What's your sense of the Trump effect and the conservative movement right now, and has it changed forever?
Well, look, there are a lot of smiles here to begin with. Not to date myself, but there was a 1970 show. I can't believe I'm quoting 1970 shows, but it was called Love American Style. Well, this is Love MAGA Style. I mean, it's just a love fest. That's really what it is. And so it's just been kind of interesting to watch. I will say this. Normally at CPAC, it's jam-packed, pun intended. This time around, it's a nice attendance, a good attendance, but nothing like jammed in the hallways. Why is that exactly? Well, I think you see Charlie Kirk's group, Turning Point USA, others as well, kind of more into the MAGA movement at different conferences throughout the year. So I'm not sure CPAC is going to have the same staying power, at least in D.C. This will be the last year it's in D.C. They're going to move it out of D.C. and do it in other areas around the country. So I think that was interesting. One last quick point to note. I think all you need to know from CPAC this year is the visual of Elon Musk with a chainsaw on stage. That pretty much sums it up. He's got the federal bureaucracy chainsaw, and it's not scissors here. It's a chainsaw, because that comes with wood chips all over the place. And Jenna, the way this first 30 days or so has been going, there are wood chips everywhere.
Yeah. Speaking of the conservative movement, and you may have all seen this article from The Atlantic this week titled "COVID Pushed a Generation of Young People to the Right." and it's all about how Gen Z is not as progressive as previous generations, especially young men. Raj, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'm not Gen Z. I'm in my 30s. Exactly what number, it doesn't really matter. But I think you're exactly spot on. I think if you look at maybe 20, 30 years ago, I feel like the left was kind of rage against the machine, bucking against the system. And now everything's suddenly flipped where it is now cool to be conservative. It is cool to fight against the power. And so I think what you're basically seeing is a mind shift happening amongst young people, where if you wanted to make a stand and really, buck the system, you're a conservative all of a sudden. If you want the government not telling you what to do, if you don't want big pharma, and it sounds a little, crunchy. I mean, if you want to be that kind of person, you have to be a conservative. So I think it's become cool to be conservative, and I think that's what you're seeing.
Yeah. I should mention new polling shows actually a slight dip in Trump's job approval. 4 polls, Gallup, Washington Post, Ipsos, Quinnipiac, CNN, all have his approval rating somewhere in the mid-40s to upper 40s. Kelly, do you think as we see him go after federal bureaucracy and as we see President Trump start to govern, could we see his job approval rating start to go down?
Sure, that will happen inevitably, because it's a very popular thing for him to do, for MAGA to actually use Doge to start whittling down this massive debt that we have. But for Democrats and those opposed to the president, it will be something that they can use to rally around when you see federal employees losing their jobs. But the point of the matter is that the president, as I've stated all along, will have to get to a space wherein, beyond the executive orders, he has to get the task done of getting his tax cuts, as well as getting price reductions, and making sure that Congress gives him a big, beautiful bill or 2 beautiful bills through reconciliation, in order to help the American people start feeling what Doge, or the effects of Doge, can do for them in their pocketbooks.
Yeah. Well, we're about 30 days in. We'll see what the first 100 days looks like. That's typically a measuring point for any administration. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. It's great to see you all. I hope you have a great weekend. And that is going to do it for Faith Nation. Thank you so much for joining us, and you too, please have a great weekend. We'll see you here Monday.